So I promised you guys a Mario Kart tutorial. You're gonna see that I kind of recorded this in the state fair. There's a lot to do. Motion tracking, rotoing, bunch of stuff. So delete everything here, go to the movie clip editor and import in your footage. Set scene frames and prefetch so that this is in memory. And I also don't need the end of this clip, so let's say that we go till 180 frames. For your tracker, enable normalize and detect features. Bring down the margin, bring down the threshold, and I'm gonna also bring down the distance. This is gonna make it so there's a lot of trackers. Control T to track forwards. Control L to lock them, go to the last frame, and we're gonna do the same thing. Shift Control T to track backwards. But we have some that are on the face, which are tracking my motion, not the camera motion, so we need to get rid of those. And you can see in the graph editor, here's all our trackers, and some of them are awful, right? So go back to the clip, go to solve, go to cleanup, and click filter tracks, X to delete, and all of a sudden we have our good trackers. And now let's try to get a solve out of this. So solve camera motion, and we have a solve error of 6.3 pixels, which by the way is awful. You want to get near or under 1 pixel. We're going to filter tracks again, X to delete them, solve camera motion again. We're now down to 2.6, which is much better, but something we're not accounting for is we don't have the camera properties, specifically the sensor width, the focal length. Enable focal length and solve camera motion again. We are under 1 pixel, which is great. Okay, let's bring this information into the 3D viewport. Hit setup tracking scene, and all of a sudden we get a camera that's moving, a bunch of stuff. You can see it's not really connected. Before we solve that, I'm just going to get rid of some objects we don't need. Just pick 3 trackers that are on the floor. It doesn't really matter which 3, as long as you hit floor, which zooms this in a lot, which we don't want. So select 2 trackers, hit set scale, and do it again with a scale of 2. You can see our plane kind of like attaches much better. I'm going to delete this and make sure your origin is set to 3D cursor. We can now kind of like move the camera and rotate it. But of course, we have our guy, which is me, not rotoed out of the footage. We have everything in the background, and we do not want that. I'm going to use DaVinci Resolve to solve this. We're going to import in the footage, go to Fusion, and this is where I'm going to do my magic. Now, before we do our roto, I'm going to make it easier for us. I'm going to do this by adding a planar tracker, and I'm just going to draw this kind of like in front of the cart, kind of with the Mario logo. Motion type, I don't know why I can't say that. Motion type, set it to translation and track forwards. You can see it's tracking the front of our cart. Go to steady, and now you can see all of a sudden our cart is centered. I'm also going to add in a transform node, keyframe the size and the center, so I'm going to start off with it centered right here. Also zoom in a bit, go a couple frames down where it gets smaller, zoom in again, center it. So now the cart is perfectly centered in our thing, which makes it much easier to roto. But I know what you're thinking. Even if we roto this, it's like transformed weirdly, and that's not what we want. But there is a way to undo this. If I copy my transform node, I can actually invert the transform, and same for the planar tracker. So I'm going to paste that over and invert the transform. This will get rid of our stabilization, giving us the original clip, but the magic is going to happen in between here. And speaking of magic, we are going to add in the magic mask. You just kind of like draw a spline, making sure to get like every aspect of our object. Oh, that was fast. So you can see it did our roto, but we have some like extra stuff. Just click subtract, get rid of that extra nonsense. There's some holes in here I want to get rid of. But yes, we can do better. In fact, just hit better. You can kind of like play around with these settings. Let's track this thing backwards, and you can see it chugging away here. Go back to the original frame. That's called the reference frame, and track forwards. Yeah, I'm seeing some error here, so you can just kind of like exit that. Okay, so here you can see some stuff starting to pop up. I can just literally like subtract that away, maybe some of this. And now I'm just going to kind of go frame by frame until there's an error, in which case I just kind of get rid of it again. Okay, so is this the best roto in the world? No. But don't forget, we have our inverse transforms, which makes it smaller in the frame, so a lot of this is going to be like less noticeable. I'm going to render this out as a PNG sequence with alpha. So in the camera settings, go to background images and replace the movie clip. Make sure to hit A to select all and open clip. I'm going to make this opaque. I'm going to set this to front. Cool thing about this is if we add geometry, it's going to be underneath. So now we just got to basically like construct our road, and let's make a material for this. And we're going to do this almost entirely with a coordinate system. So look at the X coordinate that goes from left to right. I'm going to process this through some math that basically lets us kind of pick how much of this we want. And then also using a wave texture, we can get these lines. Let's try 1500. Process this through some more math. And now I could kind of mix this together using this as the factor, where some of these are red and let's say some of these are white. We can mix again using this as the factor, some kind of like grayish color. I want these to be a bit shorter and the road to be a bit longer. And now the last thing that I want to do is kind of add some like extra stripes. Again, processing it through this. So we're going to need another compare node, view this, make it thinner. And now we should be able to multiply these together, which you can see gives us our like road line mask. Let's kind of create a yellowish color. And we want our guy, again, that's me, to kind of like go down the road, which I can either do by moving the camera, but there's difficulties with that, you'll find out, or we can do that with the road. Move this thing down all the way. Probably easier to do this from the top view, and that is going to be our first frame. Go to the last frame, bring it all the way down. Keyframe, hit T and make sure the interpolation is linear. Okay, and there we go. The road is passing us by. Let's create some landscape. I'm going to do this with geometry nodes. I'm just going to kind of like start off with the plane here, putting it slightly beneath the road, and then finally take this object and parent it to our road. Go to edit mode and add like a stupid amount of loop cuts. We're also going to add one on the y-axis, and these things are rectangles, so I'm just going to make it a bit wider. Then in the camera view, we are going to subdivide the ever-living shit out of this. Expect this to be like a million polygons. Make a geonodes, and we are basically going to displace this using a height map that's based on some noise. Make this the offset, and whoa, we have some noise. It's looking horrible. You increase this, and all of a sudden you can see it looks a lot better. Bring down the scale so we have less hills, bring up the detail so they're more detailed, and we can make this level with our road. We're kind of clipping through mountains because some of them are above the road and some of them are under. So we need to make some kind of mask to fix this. We're going to be using the x-axis to do this. I'm just going to take an absolute value, which you can see centered on the road, filter this through a color ramp, add a multiplication, connect the thing to the thing, and now we are going through mountains, but they are too tall. call multiply by like 0.2. This is going to make the mountains shorter, change the interpolation to ease, and this is now looking like we're going through some landscape. Beautiful. I'm going to make a material for this, call it hills, make sure this is applied in the geonodes that's necessary. And now I think we do some shading relative to the Z component, which looks like this. We're going to use this to basically like mix between two colors. Let's make this thing a bit higher contrast. But a trick we can do here is kind of like mix in some noise, set to linear light. And now when we play with this factor, it kind of breaks up the pattern a little. I'm going to multiply this, I think on the Y-axis. I think there's room for improvement. First of all, we need some kind of like world texture. I'm going to use a sky texture. Obviously that is too bright, so something like that. And this is what settling looks like. I'm going to add in a bit of detail so the grass doesn't look so boring. I'm thinking high scale kind of like detail here. And I'm basically going to mix like two different colors of grass here. And then the final piece de resistance is we're going to make this a normal map as well. Okay, so this is looking a lot more lively on every single frame. Now I downloaded some models from a certain website. I won't say which. I do not need the armature. And I want to take this tree element and basically scatter it everywhere. I'm going to scatter some points for ourselves. I'm just transforming these so that they're the correct scale. Now I downloaded some models from the internet, specifically the Koopa shell, which I want to show you how to launch. You just got to make this thing smaller, keyframe the scale, and then go a couple frames back when the hand has been like lowered, scale it to 0, and then add a keyframe. And I want this thing kind of like perpetually rotating, so I'm going to add a bit of a function. We're going to take the frame number and divide by 10, keyframe the location, find the fling, and then move this thing forward. For the material of this, I want it to look more like a special item, so I'm going to add some emission. We're going to use a Fresnel node, connect that to the strength. I want it to be stronger, so I'm going to multiply it. I'm into it. And before we continue any further, I do want to like render out some of our progress so we can see what it looks like. So I'm going to do a pass without the green shell and obviously without the roto. Now what you're going to notice is when we render this, we kind of get a smear, and it's also going to try to render it twice. So what's up with that? Well, when we hit setup tracking scene, it also made a background layer that we don't want. So I'm going to delete the background layer. We got to take our motion blur and make it much smaller. And I think honestly that's fine. In fact, I can take our shell and put it in its own collection. And you're thinking, why is he doing this? Well, we actually have a setting in the outliner called indirect only, and I'm going to enable it for the shell collection. What this is going to do is it's going to make our shell invisible, but it keeps stuff like the shadow and stuff that we actually care about. We want some shadow for the cart. I'm just going to do the wheels because it's easy. Rotate that on its side. Just going to make it a bit smaller. When you look at it, you can see it's not actually perfect. So are we going to kind of go back and do the motion tracking again? No. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make some duplicates of this. I'm going to select my 4 wheels and keyframe the location, rotation, and scale. And then as we go down this like sequence and it becomes out of line, all we're going to do is we're just going to kind of like reposition this. And now from the perspective of the camera, these wheels are actually latching on. Of course, we know in reality what's happening is we're moving and scaling these wheels, but it doesn't matter because it looks fine from the camera. In fact, we can make this its own collection. And you can see this is intersecting with the road and casting its own shadow. It doesn't matter if it's perfect. In fact, take the wheels thing and enable indirect only. You can see we have this foreground and background and a whole bunch of nonsense. So for now, I'm actually going to get rid of the background, and I don't need all this stuff. I just want to take the foreground and render it. So this is what we should be rendering. Let me also get a foreground element of the shell. So I'm going to disable indirect on all of these, set film to transparent, and this is like literally of only the shell. Okay, let's bring in our footage. I want to make sure all these frame rates match up. I think some of them are at 30 and some of them are at 24. Here's our render of our like fast-paced thing. I'm going to go into Fusion and then merge our layers. And then the next one on top is our shell. Oh no, that I rendered this without a transparent background. My mistake. Let's throw in a Luma here. We can fix it in post. Bring up the high to something like that until we get a bit of grain and just kind of like blur it a little and I guess ease on this. And check that out. That is rocking. I'm going to increase the saturation so it kind of like matches the vibe of this better. Maybe also a tiny bit of contrast. And let's throw some camera shake to hide the ever-living shit out of it. I'm going to do it in open effects. So camera shake, max speed, max motion blur. Here's what it looks like so far. I don't think I want to have as much pan, which is like the left and right motion. So I'm just going to kind of bring that down. A little bit of zoom. And I think that looks much better. Obviously, some of our borders poking through. So I'm just going to like zoom to crop. Okay, that is much more manageable. Now, there's a lot more things we can do to this. I spent like a whole day on my shot. I'm just going to do 1 or 2 more to get you 80% of the way there. And then you can have fun with the rest. And have fun is code for you're going to do it. I kind of have these green energy lines propagating when I shoot out the shell. So this is the part of the footage we care about. And actually, the way I made this effect is we just kind of put an edge detect. Now you can see it's detected the edges. Bring down the width, color correct it so it's mainly green. So just kind of push that. And the key insight is we are going to take our original footage and put this over. I find that screen works pretty well. So let's connect that right there. Now, as I launch my hand over here, this is when I want the effect to be. So I'm going to have it start like fully transparent and keyframe that, go a couple frames down, make it fully opaque, have it hold for a couple frames, and let's have it fizzle out. I don't want the lines everywhere. I just want them in some spots. And a quick way to do this is I'm just going to bring in a source of randomness, specifically this fast noise, which I'm going to up the contrast on, up the detail on, and I'm also going to add some seeth rate, which is going to make this kind of like animate over time. I'm also going to keyframe the center of this, so it's kind of like moving across the shot, and we make this our mask. Now you can see it's kind of like, whoa, it looks like that. And don't forget, we can take this edge detect and kind of like mess around with it, so feel free to play with that. The reason this doesn't look like it makes any sense is this thing's just kind of coasting on top of it, right? The wheels should be spinning. So here I've isolated my wheels. New material, I'm going to call it wheel. I'm going to import in this image of like a tire texture I found, so just kind of shift that there, push this to the side, and then the piece de resistance, which I guess I just can't stop saying, is we're going to add a bit of normal mapping. Select these extra wheels and shift click our main one, Control L, and link materials to get it on everything. And then to get these to spin, I'm actually just going to change the delta transform. Hash frame divided by 2. Take that, make it a negative, so it's spinning the other way. Actually, it's going pretty slow. Let's divide it by 0.5. So now these bad bad boys are all spinning. And just as a bit of an extra detail, take the Z location and just add a tiny bit of noise onto this. So this is going to make it go up and down really quickly. Take the strength and make it less strength. So now it's just vibrating a little. Add a bit of depth and then copy this. And we can go to the Z location of all of these and basically just paste the same effect. And now these are all vibrating. Okay, I put the wheels on, but obviously we have more roto issues. So let's roto. I'm going to roto here. Let's disable this so we can see what we're doing. Also a bit of that. Get that wheel. Don't forget, you can hit better to make it better. And there's definitely some glitches here, but I get to hide behind it's just a tutorial bro defense. So I'm going to make that the matte, and that gets rid of where we don't want it. And also color correction never hurt anybody, so just a smidge of that. I find that an erode/dilate doesn't hurt, so I'm just going to increase it a little. This is before and after, but this gets you 80% of the way there. And with the tips I showed you in this tutorial, I am confident that you can finish it. So thank you for watching this tutorial. I want to remind you that the original blend file for the first one I did is available on Patreon for you to download, and I want to take this time to thank the beautiful, wonderful patrons. If you want to join the ranks of them, whether it be early access to tutorials or getting the blend files or seeing some exclusive tutorials I made in the past, that is the place to do it. Thanks for watching.